big pharmaceutical companies just have so much power and money. What do you think is actually causing the pushback on looking into vaccines?
I think it's a mix of money and religion. There's a huge incentive with vaccines. There's no question about it. And pharma has a stranglehold on that. They fund the medical schools, they fund the medical journals, they fund the news, politicians, they fund everything. And they're not doing that to be nice people. They know that if, I scratch your back, you scratch mine, and they have all the money, so they can discredit anybody. They could do anything that they want to. So I think that's one part. I think the other part is...
Welcome to the Foundations of Learning podcast. I hope to inspire you to actively participate in your child's learning journey, fostering a love for knowledge and nurturing the skills necessary for success in a rapidly changing world. All right, Joel, I am so excited to have a conversation with you today. We are going to be talking about children's health and vaccines, and it is such a touchy subject for so many people, and I don't believe it should be. And I do want to start off by saying that I did read your book, and I've actually read a couple of books about vaccines because I have a 9-month-old. And so I did so much research before having my baby. I am in no way, shape, or form an expert, but I will say your book is the best book that I have read in regards to you really understand the anti-vax, as you would call it, and pro-vax side of things, and bringing it in together to really try to provide informed consent. Like, honestly, I would be like, oh, I think I have a great question. And then you would address it. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay, he's good. He knows what the narratives are on each side of it and how to kind of give you the information that you need to really make an informed decision. So I really appreciated your book, the humor. Anyways, I just wanted to tell you that it was a great book, and also your emails that you send out. So great. So anyone listening, they should definitely purchase your book, even if they're not hesitant, just to inform themselves more and have, more information on that end. And then also your emails, just fantastic. So anyways, I did want to tell you that first off.
Thank you. I mean, it's a crazy topic. It really is. Mm-hmm. And, the last place I ever thought I would be sitting here talking about vaccines. It's not like that was the thing that I thought would be where I would be. I went to regular, a great medical program. I trained at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, one of the top Western programs that there is, and never really thought much about vaccines. We just were taught here are the horrible diseases, and here is the statistics on it, how much better it is today. Here are your great vaccines. Good luck. Here's your schedule. And that's really all you learn. And I think that I have a very unique perspective on the topic because I started to practice integrative medicine. And when you're in that space, you realize that people have a lot of questions about vaccines. And so it really forced me to learn a lot more. And so I came from a very Western background, but have really over the years tried my best to educate myself on this. And then, with COVID and all the frustrations around that, it really pushed me over the edge to feel like I do need to speak a little bit more about vaccines. And I was getting more and more questions, and I was so frustrated that we couldn't talk about it. And there should be no topic that we can't talk about or that's censored. We should be able to have conversations just like this that are respectful, that talk about what we do and do not know. And that's what pushed me to write the book, Between a Shot and a Hard Place, because I was just getting the same questions over and over again, and I needed to be as educated as possible to be able to talk about it. And so we're here today, and it is a little bit different space right now. I think people are much more open to having these discussions, and that's good. I mean, I haven't really gotten a lot of hate, and I thought I was going to, and be called, crazy wackadoodle anti-vaxxer, but that's just not true. I mean, we vaccinate in our office. I'm not against vaccines. I just don't believe in forcing people to do things. I think that parents should have choices, and our job is to educate. And in our office, we have people that do the regular CDC schedule. Some people go on a slow schedule. Some people don't do it. And that's where we are. I mean, I don't force anybody to do it. We just talk about it, but I'm not against vaccines for sure.
Yeah. And I think, as a parent myself and going into the pediatrician's office, I really wanted to be as prepared as I could in trying to understand it myself. Right. And so like I said, I've read a few books on it. I've listened to a million podcasts with different pediatricians and things, talking about this. And I follow another account called Just the Inserts, and, all of these different accounts that are out there that I've just been trying to educate myself so that when I went into the pediatrician's office, I kind of knew okay, this is what the schedule is. This is, and I could have educated questions to ask, because it's such a big topic, and you have to understand so much about it and about the diseases and the, vaccines. And really, as a parent, like, all you want to do is you want to weigh the risk benefit, right? Because you're, hearing things on both sides, because it is kind of a polarized topic, especially on social media, I would say, because you have, accounts that are like heavy anti-vax. You have accounts that are heavy pro-vaccine. And there's not much middle ground. And so I really appreciated the middle ground that you came to, because like you said, it's not that anyone's against vaccines. It's just that we want to understand, like, what is it that we're putting in our child's body, right? Just as we want to understand what is the, sickness. And if my child is a normal, healthy child, like, are they going to like die from this sickness, or are they just going to get a little bit sick and then they'll be fine and we'll like move on, right? Like, so that's one thing that we're going to kind of go into today on the podcast, because it is so polarized. I know you said that you didn't get as much hate as you thought you would, which I think is amazing, because I love that the environment of it is changing so that we can have these conversations, like you said, and that parents can truly have that informed consent. But why do you think that the vaccine conversation in particular became so like emotionally charged and polarized? And how does that impact parents when they're trying to make this decision?
I think it's such an emotional decision, and I think, there's a lot that goes into vaccines. There's a lot of nuance behind the scenes that's been building over the years in terms of pushing vaccines and the financials behind it. It's a very different product than really anything else on the market, and so the forces are quite different behind it. And I just think at the end of the day, that has led to a very different place than any other product that we have in our homes or in our lives. Like, we're not pro or anti car, we're anti cars that explode on you, but we're not anti car. It's like, it's the same thing with a vaccine. We shouldn't be pro or anti-vaccine. We want to be pro-healthy child, right? We want to have vaccines that protect you, but we also don't want vaccines that cause issues, right? And both those things can be true, and yet it seems like the medical establishment especially has moved to this place where any sort of nuanced conversation fosters hesitancy in their minds, and therefore it's not worth having. And so all we can do is say safe and effective and push the benefits of it without really ever discussing the concerns around it. And I think that door got blown open during COVID. I think everybody saw that in action. I certainly did. And you have this conversation about safe and effective, right, with the COVID vaccine. And it just didn't make any sense to anyone who was thinking about it. Like, that just doesn't make sense to say something like that. It's just propaganda. You can't say something is safe when it's new. You just don't know that. You can say, well, it seems like there are benefits. It seems like what we're seeing from the research shows that it decreases your risk of going to hospital, decreases your risk of death. We haven't seen any major complications from it yet, but we also have only been studying it for a few months, so we just don't know. That would be honest, and that's totally fine. You can't know what you're going to find in the future. They didn't know about myocarditis, one would hope, from the start. That was certainly something they found later, but you can't know that, so that's okay. You don't need to know everything, but when the only thing you're able to talk about is the benefits, and you're not hearing truth, and you're hearing things like, oh, natural immunity doesn't count, even though it does for everything else, then everybody starts to wonder, okay, if you're saying this about this vaccine, which doesn't make any common sense, and you're clearly pushing one narrative, you're clearly pushing this on everybody, and not having a nuanced discussion of who it might benefit the most, what are the risks, what do we know and not know, and can we continue to research this to make sure that it's as safe as possible. When people didn't see that, now they sit back and say, wait a minute, this is what's going on with these vaccines. What about all the other vaccines? And that blew the door wide open to what we're seeing today, which is hesitancy at the highest rates it has ever been, the highest rates of exemptions, the lowest rates of vaccination ever, because now people don't trust anything. And the reality of a lot of modern medicine when it comes to vaccines is the discussion focuses on the benefits of vaccines and very rarely focuses on any sort of risks that might come from vaccines. And the risks really haven't been studied in the way that I think they should have been. And I think that's the big missing piece of the puzzle. I think we understand and have a very good very good epidemiology around the diseases, right? We understand the diseases, we understand how bad they can be, we understand how many people get them. We have pretty decent understanding of short-term risks, but we really don't understand the long-term risks. And parents are seeing this chronic disease epidemic around the country, where about 50% of kids have a chronic condition like asthma, allergies, autoimmune conditions, autism, behavioral concerns, neurodevelopmental concerns, and they start to wonder, do vaccines have anything to do with that? My friend says they got a vaccine, their kid changed the day after. I saw this story on Instagram. Is that true? This person's really strongly saying how vaccines are the worst thing ever in the world and I should never get it, and they're causing all the problems. And you start to wonder what's true and what's not true. And when you see your establishments lying to you and telling you half truths, then you start to wonder what is true. And so that's where we're sitting today. And I certainly saw that during the pandemic. And that was one of the reasons why I chose to write the book in the first place. Again, not to tell people what to do, but to go through, okay, what do we know? What do we not know? What is the research? What's the evidence? What do we know about the diseases? How risky are they actually for your kid? And then what do we know about the risks and what do we not know? Because I think that's where we have to start. If we can have honest conversations from that point, then we can continue to make these products better and safer and have honest, nuanced discussions. That's what we should be having. That's what we need to see from public health. And until that occurs, the trust is going to continue to plummet.
Yeah, 100%. And that's really like what got me thinking, as a mom and, thinking about the schedule and vaccines and everything was 2020, after all of that happened. And, they're saying trust the science and it's safe and effective, but also if you don't get the shot, you might lose your job or whatever, right? Like, so there were so many things that were happening that it was like, why are you trying to force this so much? And also, like you said, like it made me personally more hesitant on like, okay, not even more hesitant, but more questioning, like, hold on a second, wait, like how many vaccines does a child have to get? And before this, I'm not even pregnant or anything. Like this is,
Right.
2020. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, like, that's so interesting. And I was an educator. And so, I had so many kids in my classes that had autoimmune diseases. They had behavioral problems. They had, chronic eczema. They had autism, ADHD, like all of these things. And as I started to look into this a little bit more, I was like, this is crazy. Like there has to be something in our environment that is causing this increase, right? And you could do, our food is even poison at this point, right? So we have the food, we have the lack of exercise, the increase in technology, we have the, increase in vaccines, we have so many things. But like as a parent, like really all you want is to just try to understand what is potentially causing these things so that you can avoid them, right? And you just want to have the best information. And as I jumped into the vaccine research, I was like, I don't understand. So I do kind of want you to explain as well how we can deem even the vaccines we have on the schedule today as safe and effective if some of them were only tested like I think I saw something, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. The Hep B vaccine that they get at birth was only tested like 5 days after the shot. They were like, oh, kids are great 5 days later, right? So like when we're thinking about safe and effective, like we would need to have a placebo group. We would need to study it long term, right? And so kind of break down what the research says right now, and like, can we as parents actually make good informed decisions with the research that we have currently?
All right. Yeah, there was a lot there. So I guess the place to start would be, we don't want to just demonize vaccines for everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned, some very important points in there about the chronic disease epidemic. We know we've talked about that, and we're seeing this increase. There's no question about it. I mean, it used to be maybe 5-10% of kids. Now we're looking at 40-50% of kids, 75% of adults have a chronic condition. That's not because of vaccines only, right? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. There's so many things that factor into that, like you mentioned, food, the toxins that we're exposed to, exercise, all these things. So it's not just vaccines, of course it's not. But the question from public health and the focus needs to be why? Like, why is this happening? What's going on? What are all the factors that are included? And we need to be open to talking about everything. And all of those things that you mentioned are very important and certainly related and probably even more related than things like vaccines. But the question of whether vaccines fits into that picture in some way is an important part, and it shouldn't be too controversial to say that or ask that. We have to look into it. We have to say, are there a subset of kids where their genetics or their environment or whatever it is increases their susceptibility to having a chronic condition and maybe exacerbates it, maybe sets it off, maybe it causes it. I think that needs to be open to discussion, and we need to be able to figure out when and if that is true so that way we can minimize that. Again, we don't want kids to get sick from diseases. Like, I don't want any kid to get measles and die, right? I don't want anybody to get whooping cough and die. But that's not the whole picture. You also don't want kids to get chronic conditions, and you also don't want um, risks and complications from vaccines. And if you can't have that nuanced conversation, then you can't say, well, maybe this vaccine is increasing the risk of eczema. Okay, why? Let's change it. Let's make it better. Let's adjust the schedule. Let's change. Is there an ingredient in there we can switch out for something that's less concerning? Like, these are the questions you should be able to ask. And we could always be making vaccines safer, but there's no push to make vaccines safer because there's no reason to at this point. There's no conversation around risks, or very little, and the vaccine manufacturers can't be sued. So, I mean, that's something I didn't know when I was in training, and most people don't know it, but it's a very special product that in 1986, they basically decided you don't sue the company if you have a problem, you sue the government. So you can actually sue a manufacturer. So the companies that are making these products have no reason to make them safer. They have every reason to avoid doing safety testing or to minimize the safety testing, because once they get their product on the market, you can't sue them. And so that's the usual market force that drives a company to make a product better, is suing them. So that's why when they make a medication, they might study it for 5, 10, 20 years before they put it on the market because they don't want to get sued. But for a vaccine, you don't have that market force. And so they can get away with, if nobody forces them to do a study without having an inert placebo. And there are many vaccines that are on the childhood schedule, basically all of them, that never study them in that best possible way first to study them against an inert placebo. So you don't have that optimal best safety testing. They aren't necessarily testing these things for years like you would expect that they would. Like you said with Hep B, the initial trials for licensure, the safety testing on the insert says 5 days or 6 days. So they studied them longer, but that's the active study for just a couple of days, 5 days. And you're like, that can't be true, and I wouldn't believe it unless I read it. And Aaron Series, the main attorney who's been doing all the lawsuits and Freedom of Information Acts, and he was like, I don't believe that. He sued them. They didn't find it. They didn't get any other more information. So that's true. Like, that's what it was licensed based upon for safety. And how is it anti-vax to say, like, is that enough safety data for my 5-day-old or for my 1-day-old, that 5 days of safety? Like, is that safe enough? I'm not saying that it is unsafe. I'm saying we need to require better. If you're going to bring a new vaccine on the market for my 1-day-old newborn, it better have tons of safety testing, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of kids, long-term safety, following it for years like that. You have to have a very high bar of safety when you're giving something to a healthy child, especially a 1-day-old. So when you look back at the trials and you see the initial research, which was done, 30, 40 years ago, had 5 days of safety testing, not against an inert placebo, that has to raise an eyebrow and say, well, wait a minute, like, is this truly safe? Is it safer than doing nothing? What is the safety profile? Do you want anybody to get hepatitis B? Of course not. I don't want anyone to get hepatitis B. But that, you have to weigh that against the risks of taking a vaccine. And that, just recently, that's been the discussion at ACIP, the advisory committee on vaccines, right? Because we're giving this vaccine to 1-day-old newborns. And when you have a low risk baby, so you don't have hepatitis B, you've tested negative, your baby has maybe a 1 in a million to 1 in 7 million chance of getting hepatitis B. It's theoretically possible that someone could come by and bleed on them, or maybe a test was wrong or something like that, but it's extremely low risk. So you have to say, okay, if every baby doesn't get a Hep B at birth, might there be a couple of kids that get hepatitis? Yes, that is possible. That's something we have to acknowledge. But what is the cost of vaccinating 3 million kids every year for something that basically all of them are not going to see? And that can't be a question that we're unable to ask, because public health's job is to weigh risks versus benefits, and you have to look at the greater good. And there are multiple angles to discuss that, and it's not just about how many kids get hepatitis B, but it's also how many kids get an injury from a vaccine. Both those questions are valid, and they're both important, and they need to be discussed and weighed against each other.
Yeah, and it's really, from what I understand, it is also hard to find the information, or even that there is a lot of information on, who was actually injured by the vaccine, only because I've heard, and like I said, all of this, please correct me, is that it might show up a year later. It might show up a few months later. Maybe it does show up a week later, right? But some of these things, because some of them haven't been tested long term, like we don't really know. So like they can't essentially prove, right, that like, oh, it was the vaccine. And I know we have, it's VAERS, right, that we can, report to, but is VAERS only reported to if you like actually like win the case that yes, it was the vaccine that caused this, or is it just anybody saying like, I think it was the vaccine? Like, how does that work?
So VAERS is self-report, so anybody can report anything to VAERS. If you think a vaccine caused your injury or caused anything, you or anybody can make a report. So it doesn't mean that it did. For example, let's say you had a heart attack today and you had a vaccine this morning. You could go to VAERS, make a report, say, I had a vaccine this morning, I had a heart attack this afternoon. It doesn't mean the vaccine caused it, but you do, report any injury around the time when you get a vaccine so they can look into it in theory. So that's what VAERS does, but you can't prove anything from VAERS. And the main thing about it is it's self-report. So you have to actually think to put in a report. And why that makes a huge difference when it comes to chronic disease is who's putting in a report for some sort of chronic disease. Like if you get a vaccine today and have a seizure this afternoon, you're going to think, okay, maybe the vaccine caused it, I'm going to go put that in. But if 3 years later your kid develops an autoimmune condition, let's say they develop lupus, are you thinking, well, my kid's vaccines 2 years ago maybe caused this or contributed to it, I'm going to go put a VAERS report? Like, you're not thinking that. So I'm not saying that they did, but that's not the way that you study those things. You have to study those things prospectively. You have to follow kids forward, and you have to see, all right, in a group of kids that got this vaccine versus a group of kids that didn't get vaccine, how many kids get autism? How many kids get lupus? How many kids get eczema? How many kids get autoimmune conditions? You have to follow those kids forward and see if there is a difference between those groups. You're not going to get that from VAERS. You could theoretically get that if you have a good database and look backwards. We still haven't studied them in that way, which is what we should be doing right now, which is crazy that we haven't done that with our databases. But there are obviously some studies out there, but really nothing or very little that's vaccinated versus unvaccinated. And mostly some of the studies are done in other places, and they're all retrospective epidemiologic studies, which are fine, but they're not the gold standard of research, the best research, which I think we just need to do at this point. I think we need to do prospective studies. I think we need to study vaccinated versus unvaccinated kids. That, to me, is the best way forward in terms of really getting the evidence that parents want and ultimately going to give us the answers that we need to make the best risk calculations. If 10 different places did a vaccinated versus unvaccinated trial, follow kids forward 20 years. And at the end of that, kids had no difference in autism, no difference in autoimmune conditions, no difference in chronic disease. That would be the evidence that would make parents very confident to do vaccines. And if you didn't find that, if you found that it did cause problems, then that would be very good evidence. Say, hey, wait a minute, maybe we have a problem here. We need to figure out why whatever we're doing is increasing that risk, and how do we improve that? Again, not to say that we shouldn't get a vaccine or give a vaccine, or that vaccines are bad. Vaccines are not good or bad. They're a medical product, and if they do cause an issue, we want to change that. And we've done that in the past. We've taken vaccines off the market because they cause too many problems, but we haven't really done that in a while, especially since 1986. That's been very rarely done because there is an incentive to do that.
Yeah. So what would you say to someone that is like, it's not ethical? Because that's one argument, right, that they have. It's not ethical to do a study where we have non-vaccinated and vaccinated kids because we are increasing their risk that they may potentially get this, infectious disease or whatever. And so this is unethical, and that's why we haven't done it, or that we won't do it, or whatever the argument is there. What would you say to someone that says that? Help your child become a confident reader with letters and sounds. This structured curriculum includes lesson plans, games, and multisensory activities to make learning letters fun and effective. Get started today at k3homeschoolfoundations.com or check out the link down below. Parents, have you ever wondered what your kids are really learning about important topics like taxes, freedom, and responsibility? As an educator, I once had to teach a social studies lesson that only focused on the positives of taxes, completely ignoring the downsides of over-taxation or the importance of personal responsibility. It made me realize how limited the perspective is in many traditional curricula. That's why I'm so passionate about the Tuttle Twins books. These books teach kids both sides of important issues like economics, freedom, and entrepreneurship in a way that's fun, engaging, and easy to understand. They help children think critically and understand the world in a more balanced way. If you're ready to check it out, use my link down below to explore their incredible resources, give your kids the tools to think for themselves, and support my podcast.
Yeah, that's certainly a reasonable discussion, and you're very unlikely to get a randomized study right now. I mean, it's unfortunate because we never did these in the first place when you should have been doing them. So now we're kind of stuck because people say, oh, well, they're protecting you from all these diseases, so we can't do that because then we're leaving kids unprotected. So that's fine. I understand that ethics, but there's no reason we can't do an unblinded study where people can choose which group they're in and they can choose to get vaccines or not. So there's nothing unethical about that. And if you choose to not get vaccines, then later you choose to get vaccines, that's fine. You can do it. I don't think there's going to be an ethical trial where you're going to force people to get vaccines that don't want it, or force people to not get vaccines when they do want it. So that's probably off the table, and that would be the best research we could possibly do. But you could still do a study where you let people choose which group they're in and you follow them forward, and that would still give you great evidence. And we've never done that before. And you can absolutely, for sure, look at the databases that we have, because there are kids that are unvaccinated in there, and you can go back and you can say, all right, let's get all the vaccinated kids, let's get all the unvaccinated kids, let's look at their rates of autism and autoimmune conditions and allergies, and let's see if the kids that are unvaccinated are different than the kids that are vaccinated or partially vaccinated. Like, that's not that hard to do, and yet it's never been done. It's insane. I thought for sure that was done, and it's not. So the question is, why? Like, why are we not using the databases that we have at Kaiser and Harvard and all these places to look at these things and provide this information that parents want? It's crazy that we don't have those studies, I think.
Yeah, I think it's crazy as well. When I was looking into all of this, I looked into it even before I got pregnant. Like, I was just fascinated by, I guess, how many, vaccines kids needed, and like the research on it and all that. And I was just so shocked that we didn't have, like, the non-vaccinated and vaccinated. Like, we weren't looking at these. And I do know, I can't think of the doctor's name right now. There was a doctor that I believe, a pediatrician, I don't remember what his name is or where he's at. You'll probably know what I'm talking about. But he did do something kind of similar just in his own practice.
Paul Thomas.
Yes. And he went in and he looked and he was like, okay, let's look at my kids that are vaccinated and unvaccinated. And he was looking at different things like autoimmune diseases, ADHD, autism, all the above. And he had found within his practice that these kids were experiencing that were vaccinated, had a higher percent chance of, getting these other things, like autoimmune diseases and stuff. Can you kind of talk on that? Like, what did what he find actually give us any good information, or is this like too little subset and we really can't say anything with what he found?
I mean, it is a small subset, but it's interesting information. Ultimately, that research was retracted. But that's the problem in this space, is that anytime anybody finds something where it may show a problem with vaccines, automatically the whole establishment comes down upon it. It gets retracted. They lose their job. He's no longer a doctor, all these things. So then it becomes really hard as the average individual to be like, well, was the study just bad? And was that true? And was it supposed to be retracted? Or are you coming down on him because he had a finding you don't like? And that's seems to be the pattern. I mean, there certainly are other studies that lean towards the fact that kids that are unvaccinated seem to be healthier on some of these markers, but then there are other studies that don't show that. But ultimately, the right kind of research to actually prove this hasn't been done. And that's the problem with epidemiologic research by nature, is when you're doing these retrospective studies, it can be really biased. You can adjust the data to really find what you're looking for. And so I think that is really why ultimately we'll see a very pro-vax person find a very pro-vax finding and an anti-vax person find an anti-vax finding, because they massage the data to point out what they're looking for, and that is not overly helpful. And the better studies tend to be bigger databases that are out there, but those are very pro-vaccine institutions, and those are the ones that tend to get their papers in the big publishers and a little bit better studies. So that's not to say that those studies are no good or they have invalid results, but that's just the nature of it. And when Paul Thomas does a study in his office, and then it's really easy to discredit one doctor, one small place, make him lose his license, all those things. And that's what happened. And we had a very big story just a couple months ago with the Henry Ford study, and that for those that don't know, the Henry Ford's a big center one of the main researchers, a very pro-vaccine individual, infectious disease doctor, was agreed to do a vaccinated versus unvaccinated study. I looked at the study; it looks excellent, about as thorough as I've seen in a vaccine study. And ultimately, he decided not to publish it, and it was very controversial. And he just didn't do it. And there was a documentary on it recently called An Inconvenient Study, and they actually got hidden footage on him talking to him like, why didn't he publish it? And he was just basically like, well, I'm scared for my career, I'm scared for my job, this is going to ruin my career, I just don't want to do it. And I think that that's what we're seeing in the vaccine space, unfortunately, is that people are just so afraid to publish anything that has any sort of negative potential results against vaccines. I don't know, maybe there's something wrong with the data, maybe he didn't do a good job. I don't know that, but that's not our job, right? Our job is to say, look, we found these problems with this product. This is one study. Let's look at that. Let's debate it. Let's put it into a journal and let them look through it and see if they find any holes. Okay, we didn't find anything. All right, well, now let's replicate it. Let's do it somewhere else. Let's do it at Kaiser. Let's do it at Harvard. Let's do it in Denmark. Let's do it in Canada. Whatever. You redo it, and it's one study, but if you find a problem, then that should lead you to say, okay, is this problem real? Let's replicate it. Now, if you do 10 studies and they all show an issue, well, now you have an issue. Like, now you need to see if that's real. And that's what science is. It's not to say that this one study is right or wrong, but when the same findings keep getting shut down, it doesn't let you follow the path that you need to with medicine and science, which is always continuing to question and always being open to finding what you don't expect. That's not what science is not about, finding what you expect. It's about finding something you don't expect and then seeing if that's true. And right now we have this push to never speak badly about vaccines, and that's crazy. That's just wrong. Like, it's not fair to our kids. We can't just keep adding more vaccines. We can't just assume that more is always better. More is not always better. We want to protect kids against things, but there also is a cost to everything. It's not a magical pill that you just take and your kids just never get a disease and that's it. Like, everything has a risk. Every medication has a risk. We know that antibiotics or steroids or chemotherapy, like, it doesn't mean you shouldn't take your chemotherapy. It could save your life, but you know that it could kill you, right? You know you could lose your hair. You know that your immune system is going to be destroyed during the time when you're taking your chemotherapy. You weigh the risks and the benefits. You say, well, this might save my life, so I'm going to choose to do it. And other people say, no, I don't want to take chemotherapy. I'm okay not taking it. I'm going to live my life out without doing it. That's how medicine works. So we should be able to do the same thing with vaccines.
Yeah. Why do you think that there is such a big pushback when we are looking at studies and people losing their licenses, being scared to lose their license? Is it like a money thing? Like, do these big pharmaceutical companies just have so much power and money and things like that that's what's causing this? Like, what do you think is actually causing, the pushback on looking into vaccines?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of money and religion. I think there's a huge incentive with vaccines. There's no question about it. And pharma has a stranglehold on that. They kind of pay for everything, right? They fund the medical schools, they fund the medical journals, they fund the news, they fund everything. Politicians, and they're not doing that to be nice people. They know that if I scratch your back, you scratch mine, and they want to keep the narrative going their way, and they have all the money, so they can discredit anybody. They could do anything that they want to if they so choose. I think that's one part. I think the other part is doctors have been so trained on vaccines as a religion. It's something that's been ingrained as this thing that's changed society and changed public health, and we put it up on a pedestal so much and are just unwilling to have a conversation. And oftentimes when I talk to doctors, even the ones that are more open-minded, they're just hesitant to open the door to any sort of hesitancy, because they think that, well, if we start to have these more nuanced conversations, then it's going to lead to people not getting vaccines, and then all these horrible diseases are going to come rolling back, and we're going to go back to the Stone Ages. And I just don't think that's true. I think people need honesty. I think most people choose to vaccinate. They understand that there are benefits, and they're just worried, and they want to know that we're always trying to make them better, and we're trying to make them as safe as possible, and we're reevaluating the schedule, and we're reevaluating to do what is best with the latest data and science. And I think that people can handle nuanced conversations. I don't think they need to be lied to. I don't think you need to say during the pandemic, hey, natural immunity doesn't count, like, because we want you to get vaccinated. Like, that is literally destroying the trust, and that is what is going to make people stop vaccinating, and that's what's happening. now. And I think that is so unfortunate, because ultimately I do think most people will choose to vaccinate if they're given the information, but they don't need to feel forced to do it. I don't know. That's what I think.
Yeah, I definitely feel like the push that there is, and that like there's no ability to, not that there's no ability, but I mean, as a parent, like I know I was so nervous to even have the conversation about vaccines because,
And can I stop you? Like,
yeah,
why? Isn't that crazy?
I
Like,
know.
isn't it crazy that you feel nervous to ask your doctor, who's going to give your kid like 30 shots, about your concerns? Like, why shouldn't you be concerned as a new mom or dad that you're putting, 20, 30 of something into your kid? Let's not forget, most of us didn't think about vaccines for like 20 plus years, right? We had, maybe 5 or 10 or whatever when we were a kid. We don't remember them. We had a whooping cough, a measles shot when we were little. Maybe you had some flu shots in between. But other than that, until COVID, like you didn't think about vaccines at all. And then all of a sudden this is thrown in your face. And then maybe you're having a kid now or in the last couple of years. And like, wait, how many vaccines are kids getting? I got to do 4 shots on one day. I got to give them 20 shots this year. Like, well, what? Like, when did that happen? You just didn't even think about it. And now you're in this world. You're like, well, wait a minute. Like, am I an anti-vaxxer? I'm not against vaccines. I'm not against science. Like, but is this safe? Like, should I give my kid 5 vaccines today? Like, is any of that unreasonable to ask? It's not unreasonable. Like, those are discussions that need to be had. A smart parent is going to say, wait, like what? Wait, how many? Is this safe? How safe is it? What's the risk of my kid getting polio? Is my kid going to get polio? Like, these aren't crazy questions. Like, nobody's got polio in 40 years. How many kids get diphtheria now? Those are not crazy questions. Those are nuanced questions that parents should have. And that is why I tried with the book to kind of go through that so people understand, okay, what is the risk from each disease? Like, can you get measles? Yes, you can. Can you get whooping cough? Yes, you can. What's the risk if you get it? How many kids get actually sick? We're so terrified of measles, but is my kid going to get really sick if they get measles? No, probably not, right? Most kids do just fine. Can you get really sick from measles? Yes, you can. But what is that risk? Like, we know those things. So you can put your fear into perspective and realize that, okay, like, here's my chance of getting this. How worried should I be about it? And then you can decide, like, do I want a vaccine for that right now? Or should I wait a little bit longer? Should I get this hepatitis B vaccine on day 1? Or can I get it when they're 2 months? Or can I get it when they're 2 years old? Like, those are real questions that parents should have. And medicine should be open to discussing it and listening to those concerns and then telling you, well, here's why I recommend it now.
Yeah, I think, coming in as a parent, I think the reason that you feel a little fearful is, one, I think that it's a really heavy topic to understand yourself when you haven't been trained in any of this and you're trying to get as much information as you can. And there's so many vaccines, so many diseases that we are vaccinating for. And it's like how to have enough information to have a productive conversation. That's like one thing that's like makes you a little more fearful. And then the other thing too is like, am I going to get kicked out of my pediatrician's office? Because you hear of people that, get kicked out of their pediatrician's office. Or like, are they going to, I don't know. I know this is a crazy one and very extreme, but like, what if they call CPS on me or something because I'm not vaccinating my kid and maybe they think I'm harming my child because I'm not vaccinating them for this disease? Or, I don't want to have my pediatrician think I'm this crazy anti-vax, crazy person when really I just I like want to know more information, right? So I think as a parent, it's like almost like you're more fearful because you don't have as much of an understanding and you don't want to you want to have a productive conversation and you don't want somebody to be like talking down to you because you don't quite understand. Like, you just want it to be a productive conversation. And I think that that's scary as a parent when you don't truly understand the diseases and the vaccines. And it's hard to fully understand that unless you've spent lots and lots and lots of hours reading books and all kinds of things to do that. And even now, like, I've read multiple books, I've listened to multiple podcasts, I have newsletters that are sent to me via so many different accounts. And still, I'm like, I still don't feel like I understand it fully, and that's one thing too that like is always in the back of your mind as a parent is like, okay, what if I get my child vaccinated, and like what are the risks of that, and what if my kid ends up being one that has issues when they get vaccinated, or what if my kid is the one that gets measles and ends up getting really sick and dying. Like both sides can be so polarizing, and like we kind of talked about in the beginning, it's a very emotional thing because you want to make the right decision for your child. But you also want to be able to have those productive conversations. And as you said too, as a pediatrician, you guys don't even really get like full training on it, right? So you might even be, asking a question and your pediatrician is like, I don't know. You know what I'm saying? So I feel like that's kind of like the fear that's there when you're a parent going into your pediatrician's office. And I'm blessed. I found an amazing pediatrician. I love her. She's so great and helpful, and like, yeah, she's amazing.
Yeah, and if you want to do the CDC schedule, that's fine. That's going to be easy to find a doctor to talk to. But if you want to do anything else, then just make sure you can find a doctor where you can have these conversations. They certainly are out there. If a doctor is not willing to have that conversation with you, and that's something that's important to you, then just find a different office where they are. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with switching doctors if that's important to you. And I think you should be able to have these conversations. Nobody has all the answers. We're still learning a lot. There's still a lot that even after doing research for the book, I don't know, this research doesn't exist on some of these things. And that's the end conclusion on some of the long-term risks, is we just don't know. But you still have to make a decision. And there are many topics for a parent where they don't necessarily need to get educated because the market corrects and kind of figures things out for you. But with vaccines, that's not the case. There's no market correction right now. There's no removing vaccines. There's none of that. And that's because you can't sue them. So ultimately, I do think it is a subject where it is really important that parents get some education, at least, so they have a general understanding. I think you need to read at least more than one book. I think you should read something that's very pro CDC and pro kind of the mainstream, something like a Paul Offit book or something like that, so you have an understanding of what's recommended in general and why. And then I think it's worthwhile to read something that discusses some of the concerns that people have around vaccines, and then you can understand that perspective as well. And then you can go from there. You can become as educated as you want to, but at least you'll have an understanding of the landscape. And so you can either ask more educated questions or understand if you want to be more worried or not more worried, depending on the subject. Some people are like, well, I just want to go with whatever the country recommends, and that's fine. And that's what most people are going to do. That's okay. But if you are someone that wants to be more educated, then it does take a little bit of reading, and it takes this continual discussion. And a lot of the stuff on vaccines, the debate on vaccines, is only happening now for the first time in like 30, 40 years. So the answers are not out there yet. I mean, you're seeing all this turmoil on vaccines right now, and every day it's so hard to keep up. And that's why I started the Substack in the first place, that you're mentioning with the newsletter, and it's done super well, which is crazy to see. Like it's been near number one on health many weeks, and not because I'm like some genius or something, but because this topic is just so interesting, I think, to people, and just trying to keep people up to date and trying to keep up to date. It's like literally every day. It's like this rule came out and this change, and I'm angry about this, and we're switching the schedule, and we're going to study this. And so it's very, very hard to keep up. And, even as we're basically speaking, it's like they just changed the recommendations on hepatitis B. And now they're talking about changing maybe the whole schedule. So, it's like it's this much of a turmoil on this topic. So how would the average parent who's sitting there be like, how am I to know what to do? There's no easy answer right now. I think you follow along, you learn and you read, and you do the best that you can. And you go with your gut, and you have discussions on questions that you have. That's the best that we can do right now. And I think that's okay to feel that way, and to feel a little bit concerned about the topic, and to also feel a little bit discombobulated on exactly what to do or what's right. I think that there's no other way to feel right now, because there's such a mixed messaging that you're like, okay, who do I trust? The American Academy of Pediatrics said this thing, and the CDC said this thing, and RFK said this thing, and my doctor says this other thing, and I don't know. So that's where we are right now, and there is no exact answer to it. There's a lot of turmoil, and we're all feeling it, including me, for sure. And I'm very deeply involved. in this stuff.
Yeah, it can get overwhelming, confusing, and you're just like at a point you kind of almost want to throw your hands up in the air like, I don't know. But I will say, and I'm not just saying this because you are on my podcast right now and I'm talking to you, but if any parent wants to read a really well put together book that goes over everything that you really need to know on both sides of the polarization and get that middle ground, really seriously, your book is so good. And even your Substack, your newsletter, because you update it so often too. Like I've seen you, you'll send out an email and then like, later on in that day, you like send out another email and you're like, actually, okay, so here's some more up-to-date information. Like, I don't even know how you do everything you're doing because I would go crazy, but it's so good. But I kind of want to talk a little bit about like these diseases, right? Because the number one thing that you hear is like, well, what about polio? What about measles, right? Like those are like the big ones that people will say to you, like if you choose not to follow the schedule, right? And so, or like whooping cough. Those are like really the big ones. And so when we're looking at this, how much research is out there on how we actually just can treat these diseases? Like, yes, we are looking at preventative measures, which is the vaccine, right? We're trying to prevent the disease. But what is there out there for treating it? And like, do we have good research on that and how we can treat it so that if you do get it, maybe it's not as bad as it was in 1900 if you were to get it, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few answers to that question. So for most of the diseases where we have vaccines, there's not a lot of treatments for it. Generally, it's something that your body would fight off, especially when it's a virus. There are not a lot of medications in general for viruses. We certainly have a lot of we have antibiotics, right? Which a lot of the death from a lot of these diseases was secondary infections. So, for example, you get measles and you start to get better from measles, but then you develop a pneumonia and then you would die from that pneumonia. So that is where a lot of the deaths come from, even like the flu, same thing. Like most people don't die from the flu, they die from a pneumonia that they get because they got the flu. So now we have antibiotics, we have better medical treatment. So even if you are to get one of those complications, if you're, let's say, the 1 in 20 kids that gets a pneumonia, we have an antibiotic, so most likely you'll get better. We have a hospital, we have oxygen, we have much better technology. So the risk of death is much lower than it ever was. And even back then, for most of these diseases, the risk of death was quite low ever before vaccines hit the market, because a lot of the fear around these diseases was from 100 plus years ago, where we didn't have sanitation, we didn't have clean water, we didn't have antibiotics, we barely had hospitals, or very different than they were today. So it was a different world, and the rates of death were much higher. Before vaccines hit the market, let's say for measles, like the death rate plummeted. It was like 98% down. You maybe had 300 to 500 deaths a year before the measles vaccine ever hit the market. So it's not that millions of kids are dying from measles every day. And I think that the news and the media really scare people, and it's not necessarily honest, but I mean, that's just the way the news is. Everything's about headlines, right? And you can die from measles. That's a reality. Kids do. They have in the last year. So that's something people need to be cognizant of. You can get pneumonia, you can get very sick. The biggest concern with measles is how contagious it is. So because it's so contagious, if you are unvaccinated, there's a very high risk you're going to get it if you're around someone without measles with measles. So if someone has measles, you're in a room, you're pretty much going to get measles. That's how contagious it is. So you just need to be aware of that. If you get measles, are you going to get very sick? Probably not. Most people do just fine. Back in the day, people were not super worried about measles, and most people get better. But could you get pneumonia? Absolutely. Could you die? Yes, you could. The risk is low, not zero. If from a public health perspective, if everyone's unvaccinated, then some people will die and some people get very sick. And so that is, I think, where the bigger messaging around something like a measles vaccine is, because the vaccines work very well. You have about 97% protection when you get 2 vaccines. So it is something you can prevent, and you can decrease those pneumonias and those hospitalizations and those deaths. So that is a possibility with that disease. But polio, we haven't had a wild case of polio in a very long time in America. So your risk if you're not traveling is basically zero. So you don't have to be super worried about it. Do we want polio to come back? Of course we don't. But you don't have to be super worried about that at the moment. Whooping cough, there's always a lot of cases of whooping cough. And I think the biggest concern would be in the first couple of months. So in the first 2 to 4 months, that's where the big concern with whooping cough is, because about half the kids that get whooping cough in those first few months go to the hospital, and kids do die from whooping cough. And we have seen a few deaths this year from whooping cough. So it's possible. Again, not that common. There's only a few thousand cases a year. There have been always. Whooping cough vaccine's not perfect. You can still pass it on even if you get the vaccine, but it does decrease your risk. So it's something to consider. And that goes back to risks versus benefits. The vaccines do protect you to some degree. The question that needs to be answered now is at what cost? That's the thing that I still don't think that we know. We understand that if you get a measles vaccine, it decreases your risk of measles, it decreases your risk of death and pneumonia, right, and other things. But the question is at what cost? And that's what I hope we can figure out over the long run so that we can weigh those things and say, well, okay, it increases your risk of eczema a little bit, increases your risk of allergies a little bit, or whatever it is that we do find. And then you have to weigh that against the decreases that you have. And for something like measles, ultimately the vaccine, very well may come out on top and say, okay, well, these are the risks, but you should just be aware of those risks. Just like if you go for a procedure for your, I don't know, for a bypass for your heart, right? You're like, okay, you're probably going to die if you don't get this procedure. But we could kill you if we do this procedure. We could, you could have bleeding, whatever. Like you're told the things that could happen, and you decide if you want to do it. For something like, let's say, polio, some people might not choose to give polio to their 2-month-old baby vaccine if they realize, well, here are the risks, and you have basically a 0% chance of getting polio. Maybe I'll give that vaccine to my kid when they're a little older. If polio starts coming back, well, that would change the equation, right? Then you would say, well, my kid does have this risk of polio. I don't want them to get polio. I'll give it to them at 2 months. But if your kid has a 0% risk of getting something and you're not traveling, do you need to give it to them at 2 months? You don't. Like, do we give everybody a smallpox vaccine now just because it exists in the world? Do you get a yellow fever vaccine if there's no yellow fever in America? Yeah, if you go to Africa, you might get your yellow fever vaccine, but you don't get it here. So that's the way that we have to weigh these things. You don't just give everybody everything just because. You have to weigh the risks and the benefits and decide what makes sense. And we're not, or haven't been, discussing it in that way before. And I think that's what we're seeing right now a little bit more of, and that's why there's so much turmoil, because there's a lot more discussion around risks and benefits, and mainstream medicine's kind of pushing back and saying benefits. And Secretary Kennedy, HHS, ACIP is starting to focus more on the risks, and you see that clash. And that's why we're seeing a lot of turmoil right now. And it's just beginning. It's going to heat up. We're just at the beginning of the craziness, I can promise you that.
Oh, 100%. Reading and writing are the cornerstones of your child's education. Without the right foundation, they can struggle. But with the right tools, they can soar. That's where the 5 Foundations of Reading e-course comes in. This course is designed to teach parents how to help their children master phonological awareness, which is the essential first step in literacy, phonics skills like decoding spelling patterns for fluent reading and writing, segmenting and blending, which are key strategies for becoming a confident reader, and orthographic mapping so that your child can learn spelling patterns and use them effectively. Last, you'll learn about high-frequency words, which are essential for fluency in everyday reading. You'll also learn the most effective ways to teach these skills, making learning time productive and enjoyable for both you and your child. Whether your child is ahead or catching up, this course equips you to support their journey to literacy success. Start today by visiting k3homeschoolfoundations.com or check out the link down below. I know I'm not the only mom who wants to be present with her kids, but sometimes I have no idea what to actually do with them. Once my daughter becomes a toddler, I already know I'll want more than just screen-free time. I'll want connection, learning, and purposeful play. But coming up with those ideas on my own every day, that sounds exhausting. That's why I love what Learning with Kelsey offers. These boxes are full of hands-on, play-based activities designed to help you connect, teach, and enjoy your child, all without prep. Whether it's fine motor skills, letters, numbers, or sensory play, there's something for every age and stage. So if you're like me, wanting to make learning meaningful at home, use my link and get 15% off your first box. You can be the teacher, guide, and safe place for your child's needs, and it doesn't have to be complicated. And I am just so grateful that there is people out there that are looking into the risks, because like you said, as I was trying to make these decisions, that's one thing that I was also finding was like, I don't actually 100% even know what the risks are for these vaccines, because there's not, like, from all the books I read, and I did read some pro-vaccine stuff, anti-vaccine stuff. Obviously, I've read your book, which is, I think, a very good middle ground to try to make this decision. And like you said, you can kind of get studies to tell you the information you want. And so it was really hard for me to decide, like, what really is the risk, right? So I do want to go a little bit into the integrative medicine part of it and like lifestyle factors and things like that, because we do know, as we've been saying throughout this podcast, that every medication is going to affect somebody completely different, right? So for example, I might be able to eat gluten just fine and somebody else might not be able to. Maybe I can, eat a really high protein diet and that works great for me. And other people, they need more fiber and things like that, right? So like everything plays a role in our nutrition and the medications that we're taking and things like that. So, when we're looking at these lifestyle factors and integrative medicine like nutrition, sleep, environment that do play roles, how do these influence a child's ability to stay healthy, to handle the infections, or to respond to vaccines?
I think they're the most important thing because that's what we have some control over. We can't control everything, but we absolutely control what we feed them. We can control trying to get the best quality produce and food that we can. We can control how much we cook and know what ingredients go into our food. We control what we purchase for our homes and what our kids are exposed to, what we put on their skin, what products are in our home. We control or, hopefully have some influence on how much they're exercising and moving. So I think that I don't think we know that these things are the main drivers of disease and also the main way that you can improve your health overall. And we're moving in a very wrong direction. Our food is very toxic overall. We are not cooking as much as we used to. We're not preparing food. All of our food is processed. Like 60-70% of our food is ultra processed now. So they're not getting the nutrients that they need, and they're full of chemicals. And we're spraying everything, and all the things that we buy in our house are toxic and or have chemicals in them at least. And it's no wonder that our bodies can't handle it. And you add to that, we're in front of screens more, and we're not really moving, we're not getting outside, we're not getting sunlight. All these things add up. So each little thing makes a huge difference. And I would say that if you ask any integrative practitioner, the thing that they would say that would make the biggest difference is just focus on the little things. You don't have to do everything. It could be overwhelming, but just try to purchase a little bit more fresh food. Try to get to know some farmers. Try to go to farmers markets. Like all these little things that we can do if we put health in the decision-making tree. We were taught as we grew up, faster, cheaper, easier. That's what we're marketed to. And what you lose with that is health. And so I think if you can put that back in the lens of the decision-making, when you go to the store, you're like, all right, well, I want to get a snack. All right, let's look at 2 bags of chips. Let's look at the ingredients. Let's look, okay, they're the same price. Which one has more ingredients that actually know what they are, that are better ingredients, fewer chemicals? All right, I'm going to buy that one. At least you're putting health back into the equation, and it doesn't always have to be more expensive. It doesn't always have to take longer. Sometimes it does, and I think that's important to factor in. But you make every decision having health being some factor, at least in your mind as a thought. And I think all those little things add up over 5 or 10 years. It makes a difference.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Even just as myself, as an adult and, going through like college and all that, I ate like crap, like for such a long time. And my body was trying to tell me that like, hey, you're eating like crap and I am going to give you problems now because you've been eating like crap for so long and changing even just my diet. Like so many things changed for me and my health and my mood and like just so many things, right? And so I think it's important that we do, understand how detrimental or how helpful nutrition can be, because I personally think food is medicine. And so we really do have to take that into account. And I like that you said that is one thing you can control, right? Like we might not have all the information, but we have a pretty good idea of what's healthy and what's not healthy. And we can make good decisions for ourselves and our families. And sometimes it does take longer if you make things from scratch. I have to make a lot of things from scratch because I am one that has some food allergies. So I have to really, be cognizant about that. But I will say too, if you are buying, a lot of packaged food or prepackaged food, it's actually way more expensive. That's what I've noticed over the years. It's way more expensive to buy a bunch of prepackaged stuff than it is to just have ingredients and then just like make food. So that's like my own little 2 cents here. But I want to go into just a little bit on parents that are, thinking or hesitant or questioning, where they're caught kind of between their own intuition and the pressure to just follow the schedule. What would you say to them as they are maybe preparing to go to the pediatrician's office and have this conversation? Like, what can they do to prepare? How can they, make sure that they are getting the information they need to make a informed decision?
Yeah, I think it's what we talked about before is just you have to read a few things, and I think that will give you the confidence to be able to ask questions in an educated way and feel comfortable asking these questions and feel comfortable with what you're going to do. You may not be 100% comfortable regardless of which one you choose, whether you choose to vaccinate or not. I mean, there's going to be a risk to everything, and that's the reality of it. There's a risk to getting a vaccine. There's a risk to not getting a vaccine, and you have to weigh what you're most comfortable with. Ultimately, do you want the risk from nature? Do you want the risk from the product? And they both have their risks, and you're going to have to make that decision without a crystal ball, knowing what the future is. And that's just parenting. I mean, that's what we have to do every day with every single decision. We don't always know what's best for them, but we have to make the decision that feels best in our guts and from our education and from what we know. And for the most part, again, it's like most kids are not going to have a horrible reaction from vaccines, and most kids are never going to be exposed to these diseases. So sometimes it can feel so stressful, but yet you don't always have to make the decision today. And if you don't feel comfortable today, you doesn't mean you have to, just because you're at the 4 years old vaccine visit doesn't mean you have to like do it this second. You can say like I need a little more time. You can go read a little bit more. You can come back in a month. You can still do it. So ultimately, waiting a couple weeks is not going to make a huge difference in general, unless you happen to be exposed to measles next week, but that's not very common. So sometimes these decisions feel more big than they really are.
Yeah, I love that you said that, you don't have to do it right this second. You don't have to do it today. Like if you don't feel like you want to do it today, like go research that, the 4 vaccines. That's kind of honestly, like when I dove into it, obviously I wanted to have as much information as I could, but before like, okay, what are they going to get at 2 months? What are they going to get at 4 months? What are they going to get at 6 months? And like looking at it vaccine to vaccine is a little less overwhelming, I would say.
Yeah. And just to finish, I would say like, when people are very hesitant but want to do vaccines, I think the thing that helps the most that I tell them is, I mean, you have to read about stuff, but don't try to like plan their whole future of vaccines out. You don't have to make every single decision today. Don't have to know the whole schedule of vaccines, what you're going to do, when you're going to do them, what you're going to do when they're 6 years old, when they haven't even been born yet. Like you don't need to know that. Focus it down on one simple question. Do I want to do vaccines or do I not want to do vaccines? You start there. If the answer is yes, I want to do vaccines, then you say, okay, when do I want to start and with which one? Right? If you want to do a slow schedule, if you want to do the regular schedule, then it's easy. Just do the slow schedule, just learn what that is. But if you want to do anything else, if you're going to do a slow schedule, then you say, okay, which vaccine do I want to do first? Let me figure that out. Okay, I want to do the whooping cough vaccine first. Great. When do I want to do that? Do I want to do it 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, 2 years, 5 years, whatever it's going to be, you have to figure that out first. Once you figure out what you want to do first, then you can get started. Then you get that first one done, then you can figure out the rest as you go. You don't have to figure it all out. And sometimes it becomes too big a question and too much information and too overwhelming to do. So if you want to do anything outside of that, you can just try to make yourself as much educated as you can on one vaccine or the one that you choose that you want to do, and then just go from there. Just do that one, get it over with, and then move forward from there, or at least have your questions to your doctor about that vaccine. Like that is, I think, what helps parents at least get going. In my office for the ones that don't necessarily want to do the full schedule, but do want to do it and kind of want to work their way through. And if they can just figure out, yes, I want to do the first one and I want to do it at this time, then they just do that. And then it's a little bit more smaller of a problem, I guess, in their mind, or a smaller decision. And then they just do that decision. It goes okay. And they're like, oh, okay, well, okay, let's do, Haemophilus influenza next or whatever they're going to choose. And then they just do it. And sometimes then they combine them or get back to the regular schedule or whatever it is. But the problem is so big sometimes for people, you can narrow it down to a smaller problem and then just work from there.
Yeah, I wouldn't suggest my method. That's for sure. But that's how I am as a person. I like to eat the whole elephant. I don't like to take little bites of it. And it definitely makes my life harder. So I definitely would not suggest, in the slightest what I did, because it was very overwhelming for a second. And then I had to like break it down into pieces. But I do want to ask before we, end this conversation, what do you hope that the next generation of parents will do differently, or even pediatricians or just people in the space of vaccines, when we are advocating for children's health?
Well, I think that we'll start listening to parents. We'll start listening to concerns that people have. And I hope that the medical space and medical establishment will be open to reevaluating vaccines and to go back to the drawing board, go back to the research, go back to the science, listen to the concerns that parents have, and then go get that research. I think we could be in a much better place in 10 or 20 years if we're open to doing the prospective studies, following them forward, seeing what actually happens. We're going to have good evidence for parents. We're going to have good evidence for doctors. It's going to be the most helpful thing to weighing risks versus benefits and to adjusting the schedule based on what we find with the data as opposed to what people feel. And right now we have a lot of people that feel that vaccines are good or feel that vaccines are bad. And the best way to actually help parents, I think, is to get the data that we would need to weigh those risks in an evidence-based way. And I don't think that's really ever been done. And that would be my hope, is that we can move forward a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more balanced, a little bit more in the middle. Vaccines are not good or bad. They're like any medical product. They have benefits and risks, and let's figure out what those are. And let's prioritize the things that are most important and have the most benefit, and let's deprioritize some of the things that are less important now, and offer them. Like, not every country offers as many vaccines as we have, because some of them are just less important, or just not as risky. And I think that should be okay. Like, we should be able to kind of weigh things, especially as we add more and more vaccines. Maybe some of the ones that just haven't been around in 50 years, we just don't need those for every kid, or maybe we just don't need 4 of them. Maybe things can be done differently. So I don't know what the answer is. I think that's a nuanced discussion that's going to take a lot of people and a lot of time. But ultimately, if we come from that angle, I think people will have more trust in the system, and it'll be more nuanced, and they'll respect the establishment again. And right now, the trust is totally gone.
Yeah. Personally, as a parent myself, like, that would definitely, I'm hopeful that that's the direction we're going. And, I definitely think that it makes you more hesitant when you do feel like you can't trust, because some things they say might not be actually backed by research or whatever it is, right? And so you feel like you're maybe being manipulated, and then it makes you more nervous. And like you said, I think it's leading to more hesitancy than it is actually helping the problem. But this has been such a great conversation, and I think that so many parents will get such good information from this podcast. And if they have not signed up for your Substack or book, I highly, highly recommend it, because you break it down in a way that's so digestible and understandable. And you break it down into like little tidbits, especially on your Substack. And in your book, like I said, it's on the top of like the best books I've read for vaccines. I will put all of the links for that down below, but tell people where they can find you, where they can follow along.
Yeah, thank you so much for the kind words. I appreciate it. Dr. Joel Gator on Instagram or X. Between a Shot and a Hard Place is the book. You can get on Amazon or anywhere the books are sold, or theshotbook.com. And the Substack's also called Between a Shot and a Hard Place.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an update. Literacy is the foundation of learning, and every child deserves the tools to succeed. If you're ready to take the next step in your child's education, check out my website at k3homeschoolfoundations.com for resources, curriculum, and support to make literacy simple and effective.